Welcome to the Easpiration Conversation Part 1. Today we're talking about Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and a few things in between. Next week we're talking about Easter Sunday and the resurrection of Jesus. And today, do you want to just say hello and who you are?
Hi, I'm Tracy.
Hello, I'm Markland.
I'm Mr. Eleanor. I'm Darren.
Wonderful. And we're going to start off just by talking about on Palm Sunday, Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. And it's up to you. Who'd like to start? Tell us something about that inspires or strikes you about that story.
You guys have done the homework. Look at that.
No, that's just a picture.
Oh, you got a picture? Let's see the picture. A Markland original. That donkey is to scale, I reckon, as well. It's amazing.
Good.
Anything you want to tell us about it, or any thoughts about that?
It's just the fact that he chose to ride on a donkey, like you said earlier, instead of riding on I don't know, something really powerful, and just done the opposite, didn't he? So that he could be on the same level as the people, so they're not like intimidated or. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, that humility, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, look at me. Because I'm not sure they would have applauded him if he did come in all like this.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Look at me, I'm amazing. Look at my hair.
Yeah.
Like Prince Charming from Shrek. There we go. I can't think of it. Great. Anyone else got any thoughts?
What struck me when I read through was it said in John's Gospel that the crowds were there because they'd heard about Lazarus being raised from the dead. And that was only, I think Bethany was only a few miles outside of Jerusalem. So word had got round, this person had been dead for 3 days and suddenly he's alive again. And the crowds came to see Jesus because of that. And I'd never really thought of that before. I'd thought the crowds were there because they'd followed Jesus for 3 years and they knew what he had done, and they'd all kind of assembled on Jerusalem en masse, and it sounded like perhaps this was local people who, for the first time perhaps, had thought, wow, who is this guy? So that was really interesting. But it was also made me think, because if that's why they're turning up, they have no real expectations, except that, well, I heard he raised someone from the dead, so I want to see who this person is, and it's just curiosity. And I've always thought of the crowds being there cheering Jesus on, saying, come on, rescue us and do this big thing. We expect you to do a big thing. And maybe it was a bit simpler than that for some people.
Yeah, amazing. And I think it's interesting about the importance of telling. So I think when we use a word like evangelism, we all go a bit, I couldn't really tell someone about my faith. But when you think about it being that simple, you'll never believe what I saw. That's really helpful, isn't it? Yeah, good, excellent. Darren, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I think at this stage, Jesus was basically the rock star of his time. People had heard the stories, they'd heard the hype, and they wanted to see the man behind it all. So when Jesus turned up, and he picked a small donkey, which kind of supports how he'd done his ministry over 3 years, kind of quiet, understated. It wasn't him that had made all the noise, it was the people that had seen and the people that had watched, and the stories that had been told, all the little whispers, it all accumulated to this riding in on a very small animal, very understated, but the people were going nuts for it. It kind of puts me in mind a lot of British Beatlemania. There wasn't really any reason for that to be happening, but people went nuts when they saw the Beatles and they knew they were coming. And I think the two, not that I'm saying Jesus was in the Beatles, obviously he wasn't, or was he? But it was it was more a case of people had heard, people are people all over the world, and no matter what time you're in, they saw this. Jesus had been set up as a celebrity of his day, and that's why people were chucking their coats down, trying to get in, and others may have just been dragged along on the euphoria of it all. Going, I don't know what's going on, but yay! And just kind of getting in on it. Same as on when Jesus had been arrested and was on trial. I don't think everybody there was going, yay, kill him. I just think they got hooked up on the euphoria of it all.
Yeah.
And then was just going, well, that seems like the right thing to be saying along with the crowd. And that's why they were going, yeah, kill him.
Absolutely. And it's quite powerful, and we might come to that later. There's that switch from Hosanna to just like a few days later, when Pilate says, do you want me to release Barabbas or Jesus? And they're shouting, crucify him, release Barabbas. It's strange, isn't it, that switch in the crowd dynamic. So
Also, Jesus stuck it to the man. You know, all the religious leaders have been oppressing their people for years, and here was Jesus for 3 years that was going, actually, no, it's not like that, it's like this. So you mentioned a superhero, but to a lot of people he could quite have been that superhero, that one person that had looked up and gone, no, religious leaders, you aren't right, you're not doing it right. And oh, by the way, we're doing this in secret, but I know you're doing it in secret. And the average everyday person who just had to go along with what they were being told and what they were being sold suddenly had this voice. And I think that as well is some reason why people were going absolutely nuts for him.
yeah, thank you. Now, we want to talk about Good Friday in a minute, and we don't have time to talk about all the things in between, but I've asked each of you to think about perhaps one thing you could share. So I'm going to start with Markland, because yours comes first during the week. So it's your own fault for picking what you picked. Just tell us what you picked out to tell us about.
Well, the temple. Just
Because this is what happens right next. Jesus
Yes.
was in Jerusalem, and right next, this is what happens.
it's just, I think it just feels a bit, when he sees that everybody like trading and doing everything in the temple, selling stuff, he's just very angry, wasn't he? Very disappointed, angry, bit let down. Like you don't have to do much. All you have to do is like not do that, but they did it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Any either of you got any thoughts about that?
Jesus basically walked into the venue, saw the merch stands everywhere, and just went nuts. They'll, 17 quid for a burger off the burger stand, that kind of thing. He just, at that point, the price hadn't been paid. And here was these sellers and vendors putting a price on the temple and on what Jesus knew was coming. And I think that might have wound me up a bit as well. Just the fact that they underpriced something that was just absolutely priceless. And they should have known it was coming because that had been the teachings for the 3 years. And they didn't, so I'm not surprised somebody as calm as Jesus, given what his message had been, kind of lost the plot and give him a little bit of aggravation.
Okay, thank you.
I think he would have shocked the people as well to show them that how serious it is to him. Like he can get angry. Like probably didn't get angry very often, but when he did, it's for a just reason. Like. Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely brilliant because I think, I think probably the most shocked people were probably the disciples who knew him best because they'd not said they've heard it. He would be like, he'd say to them, "Do you still not understand?" and be frustrated with them. No. But they'd not seen him be physically violent, and it almost feels wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This isn't Jesus. You'd be thinking, is he allowed to do that?
It would have been very effective as well because if a person doesn't get angry very often, when they do, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I find really challenging because, you know, and to be clear on behalf of our lawyers, Bethesda Baptist Church does not endorse the smashing up of anyone's premises. That's pretty bad, isn't it? But there does come that moment of absolute rage of this is completely out of order. And it's just as you were explaining, Darren, that sense of the people needed the animal sacrifice at that time to get to God. But someone would turn up wanting to sacrifice their animal to make themselves right with God, and they couldn't afford it because they were being ripped off by people. And that's what made Jesus so angry. And when you think about it, the Bible says he's the perfect sacrifice. So he's about, and we'll talk about this in a minute, he's about to give his life on the cross and die in agony. And he's giving his everything for free. And then these other people making a buck off exploiting the poor. And it's interesting, it's one of the things that when we read this a lot in the Old Testament that makes God angry is when the poor are exploited. And I think that's something we ought to reflect on, but not right now, because we've got to move on. Tracy, what did you want to tell us about the week leading up to Good Friday?
I was just really surprised and encouraged that actually several times in that week, the Bible has Jesus just completely at his wit's end and really distressed and overwhelmed. And that really encouraged me because quite often I feel overwhelmed by things in life. and that's okay to be honest about that. We all know that Jesus in Gethsemane, and he's praying to God and he's saying, I can't go through this with this. I don't want to go through with this. This is too much. But I hadn't realised he'd spent the whole week feeling like that. And that really touched me, actually, to think, Jesus, yes, he was God, but he was also a human. But he was honest about what he was feeling enough that those around could sense that to write it down. And at one bit, he's saying, my soul is deeply troubled. And should I pray, Father, save me from this hour? But this is the reason I came. Father, bring glory to your name. And it's like he's honest about how he's feeling. And he's knowing it's not going to change. And yet he's saying, God, this is what you put me here for. So I'm going to keep going. And we've had a tricky week this week. And sometimes you just think, I can't keep doing this. This is too much. And yet actually Jesus did the same thing and said, this is too much, but he kept going. And he has a meal with his disciples and he washes their feet and he's still trying to teach them stuff. And they're still not getting it. And Jesus is still carrying this load of this horrendous thing that is about to happen to him. But he does it and he knows God is with him. And it just meant so much to me this week, actually, that's okay. It's not okay and it's really horrible. But we don't fail just because life isn't going well, and we don't fail just because it's getting to us. It got to Jesus. Yeah, there was something else I wanted to say about that as well. It's completely gone out of my mind.
Let's go to Darren, because Darren wanted to say something about Gethsemane as well, and then we'll come back to that. It'll come back to you in a minute.
Yeah, Gethsemane. For me, this is one of the greatest lessons learned, where permission is given to us to follow that example, because Jesus becomes just this massively human, vulnerable individual who knows what's coming, can see it coming, knows that's what all the training has been for, and knows that he has to do it, but this human side of him just goes, no, I can't. I don't want to. It's going to be horrible. And for me, it's when you're in that place where things are too horrible to talk about, and where the end that you see isn't the end that you want it to be. But you know you can't really change that. It's set in stone. You've done your best, you've done your bit, you followed the rules, yet you know it's still happening. I could just imagine Jesus being at that point and going, look, I just, no. And for me, it's kind of a shame that the stories and the witnesses don't have that two-way conversation. So they know, or they've all assumed that they know what Jesus is saying. But what they're not doing is they're not getting the other side, the flip of that, and hearing what God's saying back to him. Because it's always a two-way conversation, even when it doesn't feel like it. And another thing that I've kind of found quite disturbing about this whole thing is Jesus didn't command his disciples to stay and pray. He asked them, as a friend would you stay and pray about this? And they fell asleep. And I think, well, how often have we relied on our friends, but we feel they've let us down? And, you know, we might have only asked this one tiny thing, but it's been all blown up and just not been done. And I just wonder how, although Jesus knew that was going to happen, how disappointed and hurt he'd done all these things, he taught all these lessons, yet this one request just wasn't done. His friends had basically gone, yeah, whatever, and gone and had a sleep. So on top of all of this stuff about, no, I don't want to really go through it and do this, and then to see that his friends, as I said, it wasn't a command to do this, it was, will you please just, and they've all gone, yeah, of course we will, and then not. I kind of can, but I can't imagine how defeated that could have made Jesus feel at that given time. And he'd already said bye to Judas, so he knew Judas was going to go and do his thing. So his friends had let him down. He'd already also said, you will deny me. And they've gone, no, we won't. But he knew that was coming as well. So his friends had let him down. I would imagine he's felt as God's let him down because he couldn't get him out of this thing. But at the end of the day, Jesus still went, you know what? It's got to be done. I think if it was me, I would have been like, yeah, see ya. Disappeared in the night. There wasn't a media presence, you know, there wasn't Facebook and stuff. So for him to disappear would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to do. But he didn't. Which tells me that he is a friend from that point of view, that he's going to be with you right until the end.
That's great. Did it come back to you?
It did, actually. While Jesus was saying, I can't find it. Oh, yeah. it's shortly after Jesus is deeply troubled and saying, one of you is going to betray me. And then he says, right in the next chapter, right, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust in me. And it just seems like two different things. His heart is troubled, and yet he's saying to his disciples, don't be troubled. Trust in God and trust in me. And I thought about that, and I thought, actually, with our tricky week this week, my heart has been troubled, deeply troubled, but I've also had a weird sense of peace. Not that things will be okay, but that God is walking with me and that I'm not doing it on my own. And I think maybe that is what he was trying to convey to the disciples. Whatever happens, God is still in this and God is still with you. So don't despair. I acknowledge that it's really tough, but don't despair because you're not walking alone. God is walking with you. And again, that was just really encouraging for me this week.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's really helpful to remind that it's okay for your heart to be troubled. It's okay for your heart to be troubled, but we then let God's peace come into those two things exist together, don't they? Yeah, helpful. We've only got a few minutes left. Just to move on, we're going to share communion in a few moments. Just thinking about the cross. Any of you got anything you just feels almost a bit disrespectful to say? What do you think about the cross in 30 seconds? But have a go if you'd like.
Well, even in the situation he was in, he still forgave the criminals, didn't he?
Yeah.
Said, forgive them. They know not what they've done. So even in that situation,
Yeah.
so he was very strong to the end.
Yeah.
Like,
And it's remarkable in what we've just been. And it's the bit where he says to one of the disciples to look after his mum, and it's just in that moment of absolute pain and tragedy. It's just that care of others. So, yeah, good. Anyone else? What strikes you about the cross?
The fact that Jesus was there with these two criminals, and the criminals are having an argument. They're one's belittling him, come on, get us down, and the other one's going, he's done nothing wrong. And I find that remarkably interesting from the point of view. Sometimes you'll have this one little voice going, yeah, don't know why you want for following Jesus, and you really just, he's doing nothing for you, he's keeping you down, blah, blah, blah. And on this other voice that's going, actually, shut up. Without all of this stuff going on, you just, Jesus is your mate. And I don't tend to think about that most of the year round, but it's just kind of this time of year when the story comes out again that I think, again, it's almost like having permission to have that inner monologue going on. And Jesus going, you'll be with me at the end of the day in heaven. So even though you have that conversation, it doesn't mean to say you're jeopardising your place in heaven.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Anything you want to?
I think what strikes me is just at the end, and he's about to die. He knows he's about to die. And he just looks to heaven and says, it's finished. I've done it. You gave me a task to do, and it's been really hard, but I've done it. So it's over to you now. And that is a real encouragement to me. He didn't give up, he persevered. He did what he'd agreed to do. And the rest is up to God, and so much of life is out of our control. And so much of life doesn't go the way we had anticipated. But that doesn't matter if we're walking with God and doing our best. That's all he asks of us.
It kind of also made it definitive. Like, this is the end. Not, it might be the end, no, I might come back in 3 days. It was a case of, this was the end, this is where the battle was done. This was absolutely stamping that event in history. And I find that remarkably interesting. And do get a bit teary when you think about it.
Yeah. It's been an amazing story. Thank you for taking part. It's just wonderful to think of the God who came to save us. And just I think what I always think of the word roller coaster when I think of this Holy Week. And just the joy, the Bible talks about the joy set before him, that Jesus came to save us. And all the way through, he's looking for, I'm going to die on the cross. It will be finished. I will rise from the dead to prove it's true. It will be done. The world will be saved. How exciting. But in amongst that, he's got the pain of thinking, but I don't want to be the sacrifice. I don't want to live with that pain. And yet he goes to the cross for us, which is a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for everything you shared.